Hi everyone, this is the second chapter in the early childhood section. So we've already talked about physical development at that 2 to 7 age group, and now we will cover cognitive development. All right. Okay, so at this stage, we are pre-operational according to Piaget. So remember, the stage before this was sensory motor. They were only really able to think with their senses and their motor capabilities. But now they're able to have more memory, right? They can represent things in their mind. Language development during this time period is extreme, right? A 2-year-old and a 7-year-old is very different. So they acquire a lot of language during that time. They're very much in the moment thinkers. Uh, Again, because their memory is still developing, they kind of need to do things now, in the moment, while they're thinking about it. Also, what they see is how it is. That'll come back to us soon. But, if a child sees something in a certain way, you might not be able to convince them otherwise, because again, that is what their perspective is. And then play comes into account, right? In chapter 10, the next chapter, we'll talk more about make believe and sociodramatic play. But basically, make believe play is acting out real and imaginary roles. Sociodramatic play is taking that make believe play into a socio or social environment, interacting with at least one other person, assigning roles, responsibilities, and interacting in a cooperative manner. Okay. So why? Why should children engage in make-believe play? Because we find a lot of benefits. They last longer, their interactions with other children, they are more involved, they draw more children into the activity, it's more cooperative, and then it also builds on their cognitive abilities like sustained attention and memory, reasoning, creativity. So we want to encourage and give them time to act out these make believe and sociodramatic roles. Now, so how do we do that in early childhood? Well, we need to provide the space, different types of materials that are both realistic and without clear function. If you think about blocks, children can use a block as a car, as a phone, build things with it. Again, it doesn't have a clear function. You can have more natural environmental things like shells and rocks and, again, things that children can find right out in their own environment. Help them with conflicts, ensure that they have rich real world experiences, and supervise and encourage them without trying to control their play. So Piaget has a lot of terms, and that's how he explains the limitations of children's thinking at this point. Remember, he didn't think we were born with an adult brain. In infancy and toddlerhood, we use our senses. At this age, they're very limited in their thinking. So egocentrism is about perspective. Children at this age have a difficult time putting themselves into someone else's shoes. They can't take the viewpoint of others cognitively many times. And again, it's not intentional, it's not selfish, it's just a limit of their thinking. So a shoe example, and again, this may not apply anymore with our high-tech phones with FaceTime and other capabilities, but let's say a child is calling with no video technology, his grandma who lives 500 miles away. He might say something like, "Hey, grandma, look at my shoes. I got new shoes." Not understanding that she, again, is 500 miles away and can't see what he's seeing. The Clogdeers example is my nephew was about 5 years old and he got out of the swimming pool and was screaming at everyone, not angrily, just yelling really loud. And finally, I went and asked him, why are you yelling? And he said, my ears are clogged. That means no one can hear me, so I'm talking loud. So again, he put his perspective of not being able to hear and assumed that everyone else was going through the same thing. So we will have a whole nother little mini video about egocentrism and theory of mind that goes along with this chapter. So make sure to also review that video. So remember perspective in terms of egocentrism. All right, so how did Piaget figure out this term and this concept? He created a three-mountain problem. So depending on where the child is on either side of the table, they see different things. One side has a red cross, another a small house, the third has a snow peak, and depending on where they are, they can see different things on the different mountains. So please watch the video this week on the cute little boys doing the three mountain task, and they're two different ages, and you can see the difference in how they respond egocentrically or don't, depending on their age. Under egocentrism is also animistic thinking or animism, the belief that inanimate objects have lifelike qualities. So believing that something that's not alive does things similar to maybe a human, right? So um, the sun is going to sleep, the clouds are crying, putting their little baby stuffed animal to bed, things that are not alive. But again, this is part of their creation, part of their imaginative thinking, so it's completely normal at this age. All right, what about centration? Centering in on only one thing at a time. They can only think about one aspect, one feature. So let's say I pointed to the shape in the bottom right and I said, okay, can you explain what is this? It's green. It's a triangle. It has 3 points, but they probably wouldn't say it's a green triangle, right? That's two features. At this age, 2 to 7, it's green. It's a tree. It's whatever it is they visualize. They, again, would not say, that's a yellow star inside of a white square. That's way too descriptive. Instead, it would be more simple and probably just focus on one feature. Okay, lack of hierarchical classification. The lack of understanding that there are classes and subclasses of different things, right? So we can have a class of flowers, but we can have several subclasses like yellow flowers, blue flowers, green flowers, etc. Well, children have a difficult time understanding the difference between the big class and the little subclasses. So if you ask them the question, are there more yellow flowers or flowers? They're more than likely going to say yellow flowers because they're only comparing it to the subclass. And irreversibility. So children at this age have difficulty changing the direction of their thought. It just keeps going forward, right? And that, again, the more memory develops, the more they're able to think back on previous events. But here's an example of a child maybe thinking that even though they're holding the box of cereal, they go to rip open the box, it rips open, the cereal goes flying everywhere, and now they think they have more cereal. They can't just think in reverse that it is the same amount, it's just now looking different. And that goes into our next concept of conservation. So children at this age have the inability to conserve. They don't understand that just because you change the outward appearance, it didn't actually change the physical characteristics. So he tried that out in different tasks, such as number, liquid, length, mass, and weight. So I also have videos on Blackboard for you to see this in practice. And I even recommend you doing this with a young child. I did it with both of my sons when they were 6 years old, and it's really interesting to see their results on these different tasks. So here's a little chart. So you do the original presentation in front of the child. You lay out pennies, you lay out buttons, as long as they're all the same, and you ask them, are there the same number of pennies in each row? It's okay if they count them, let them count them. You want them to say yes. Now, right in front of the child's eyes, you're going to transform one of those rows. You're either going to push one together or spread one apart and say, now are there the same number of pennies in each row, or does one row have more? Now again, the young pre-operational child usually thinks, oh, if it's longer, then it has more, even though they just counted it. They have the inability to understand that just because you change the appearance doesn't mean the amount actually changed. So you do the same thing with mass. You can do it with Play-Doh. Do the same thing with liquid. And again, you just want two identical glasses and then pour one glass right in front of the child's eyes into a totally different shaped glass that will look different. Now, again, depending on where the child is in their understanding of conservation, they may not get some of them and they may get others. When I did it with my children at 6, they both got number and mass, but liquid, one of them was confused. And again, they were almost at the end of the pre-operational stage. So I totally recommend doing that with a young child if you have safe access to do so. Okay, application of theory. So we've learned now a little bit about Piaget. He goes by stages, and he also believes that children need to be active participants, right? They need to explore, they need to be hands-on. So his classroom would be set up in a way for discovery learning. You notice the tubs are at a level where the children can pull them out, they can manipulate the items, they can put them on the table. Readiness to learn also comes in, age appropriateness, so the items in the classroom are appropriate for the age of the child. And the teaching process, again, maybe the teacher would put things out on the table for the children to explore, but they're more of a tool to support the child's exploration of their environment. So here's a little bit more about age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. So everything is set up to accommodate the child. The physical setting, the group size is small, so there's a small caregiver to child ratio. There's constant daily activities. The adult-child interactions are appropriate and the teachers are qualified. There's licensing, and again, all of these come together to make it developmentally appropriate. And then the teacher sets up the environment so that it's age appropriate for the child to be able to discover and to learn. Now, if we're talking about Piaget, we also want to again mention Vygotsky, right? So he believed children learn within a social context. They need that collaborative environment with other children, with other people to interact and to learn from each other. And he also believed make-believe play was a great opportunity for children to try out roles and to be in a social environment. So Vygotsky, since he's not a stage theorist, he wasn't really worried about age appropriate. He would instead assess children's abilities. What does this children already know? What do they need to learn? And how can I facilitate their learning? So he would do that through assisted discovery, similar to Piaget, but he's going to be there asking questions, allowing reciprocal teaching where the children can be in charge, sometimes the teacher's in charge, and again, accommodating non-traditional learners. So remember, he felt that children could learn from more capable people, more knowledgeable others, MKOs, more knowledgeable others, where it didn't matter if they were younger than you, if they had knowledge to share, you could learn from them. And Vygotsky really encouraged that social process to accommodate, again, reaching that zone of proximal development. All right. Now, Vygotsky also mentioned private speech, and Piaget called it egocentric speech because, again, it's only from your own perspective. But Vygotsky viewed this as the foundation for all of our higher thinking. Once we started conversing with others, then we were able to start this internal voice. And that internal voice, or your own private speech, guides your own behavior. And so many times we'll talk to ourselves, or sometimes out loud, especially when we're children, when we get to something that's confusing or something that needs a little bit more processing. And again, children's private speech is typically external until they start to understand that, oh, this can go on in my mind, other people don't need to hear me, and that process can occur. So this speech is again very important, and it's from their own perspective. Theorists also believe that that internal voice is many times our caregiver's voice, which again just shows how important and how much a caregiver influences who we become. Okay, so what makes the differences between children in terms of their mental abilities and their development? Well, your home environment, again, is there a lot of talking, singing going on, playing games, reading books, or is that not happening? Is the child going to some kind of childcare or preschool program? Is it child-centered or is it academic? So we'll look at that in just a minute. Are they watching a lot of television? Or if they are, is it more educationally based? So again, all of these play into how children have differences in their mental abilities. To support their language learning, we want to recast when they speak incorrectly. Um, m- I always loved when my children spoke as toddlers because they would say things that sounded so cute, like, uh, "Bruschetti for dinner?" And then you would say to them, "Oh, are we having spaghetti for dinner?" "Yeah," so that they can hear it correctly, but that you're not telling them, "No, that's incorrect." We can also expand on their speech. Again, when they just say Paschetti, we can say, yeah, we're going to have spaghetti for dinner, and fill in those missing elements to their speech. And again, the role of us as adults is to listen and elaborate, model that usage, and stimulate them to talk further. Okay, and a little bit more on language learning. So fast mapping starts to happen. And again, cognitive development happens at a rapid rate. So children start to learn a word after one exposure. And sometimes, rather than knowing the exact definition of that word, they just stick it into an existing category, right? Assimilation. And sometimes it's an error. So a 2-year-old might think a mother is any woman who is caring, because in their mind, that's what a mother is. Or a 2-year-old says blue when the color is actually gray, right? So, but that's their brain fast mapping, and we as caregivers try to help them when they make those errors. They might also over-regularize, where they apply the rules of grammar when it's not appropriate, like foots, tooths, mouses, I go to the store. So again, that's when we're there as adults to kind of restructure and reframe those sentences. Now, just a reminder, conversation is different than conservation, which was Piaget's concept. So again, conservation is Piaget, and that's not understanding that things are changing because you change how they look. Conversation is speaking, and you'll notice with children it gets easier as they get older. Talking to young children on the phone can be really difficult. They don't really understand the pragmatics and the social expectations of using the phone. But really, from ages 4 to 8, it's like talking to a totally different child, right? Because they understand how it works and more about the gives and takes of conversation. And lastly, ending with preschool and daycare centers, I mentioned child-centered versus teacher-directed or more academic. So most child-centered programs focus on learning coming from within the child, letting them explore, pushing against those academic testing and standards, and really allowing them to develop their social skills, their creative skills, and incorporating developmental learning along the way. Again, project-based, emergent, those are very common child-centered programs. So if you've heard of programs that kind of started in Italy, such as Montessori or Reggio Emilia, those start from the child. What are the child's needs and how can we support that child in developing and learning from within the child? Teacher directed, on the other hand, is a lot more about instruction rather than, facilitating learning in kind of an open environment. having a pre-designed lesson plan, um, and many times is influenced a lot by parents who want more academics and don't understand that through play, children are able to still get the tools they need for academic learning. So, you want to think about that when choosing or when working at a preschool, pre-K, transitional kindergarten, kindergarten. Again, their approach is very important in terms of how the children will be learning on a daily basis. Now, for example, one of those programs, Project Head Start, is actually an intervention program. It was started in the 1960s to try to end the war on poverty. They thought if we could start from the beginning when children are young and give them the tools they need and give them education and resources, nutrition, health services, then we give them that head start to being successful. So by 2006, there were over 20,000 Head Start centers in the US. And that just shows you again, we're trying to giving children tools, education, social skills, the avenue to play that has been found to be the most successful and leading to helping those children get out of poverty and ending those cycles within their families. Now, remember Bronfenbrenner? He's a co-founder. And doesn't that make sense when you're thinking about funding from the government, incorporating families, teachers, the community, the systems, right? Okay, and lastly is theory of mind. So, theory of mind is about what someone else might be thinking, the understanding of that. So, as a child is being egocentric, he also starts to understand that others have their own beliefs, their own desires, their own perspectives, so they can be actually happening at the exact same time. Toddlers start to use words that show they start to understand what thinking is. I think we did this before. I remember that story. So, but at that age, they believe behavior is based on desire. So if mom puts me in timeout, that's because she wants to punish me, not really understanding that it's for a reason. But preschoolers start to really understand that. And that's when you start to hear things like, it was an accident, because they start to understand if I can change my teacher or my mom or my dad's understanding of what happened, it was an accident, then I'm not going to get in trouble or put in timeout so they're making those connections. They're starting to understand the beliefs, the desires, the perspective, the intentions of others around them. And once they do, they start to understand that you can trick people, and you can see very young children who start to understand sarcasm and humor and use it in the correct way. By school age, they start to understand that children can be have false beliefs. So they'll show them a Band-Aid box and an unmarked box and show them, hey, but look, the Band-Aids are actually in the unmarked box. But Susie comes in. Where do you think Susie's going to think the Band-Aids are? Well, an older child understands, oh, she's going to be tricked. She's going to think they're in the Band-Aid box, but they're really in the other box. A younger child who, again, might be egocentric and knows the perspective might say, oh, she's going to look in the unmarked box because that's where they are. Again, not understanding that she's going to be tricked, right? Because how would she know that? Well, an egocentric child or one who hasn't fully developed their theory of mind is not at a full understanding of that. So please watch the other PowerPoint on theory of mind and egocentrism and email me with any questions.